most of nice apps with really cool UIs and really smooth animation are probably not ready for accessibility. For example, when handling text resize. Let's see some of them. Let's try increasing text in WhatsApp. Yep, text resize test is passed. What about the Amazon Assistant? It passes too, nice. What about Spotify? Spotify did a good job at adapting its layout. Let's try with Waze. And it actually ignored it. So I don't know if I'll still be able to use it when I get older. Now, I would like to give you an overview of how we can implement and support this feature in our projects. Good morning, everyone. This silence is what a deaf person will experience if I were to give my talk using only my voice.
Voiceover on. This instead is what a blind person would experience if I used assistive technology to read the content of my slides.
I don't know how many of you have ever heard voiceover speaking or watched how a blind person actually uses the same devices that we use and lives in the same world as we are. But I would like to introduce myself and my topic with another example of accessible experience. So my name is Davide. I've been developing on iOS for 12 years. And 1 year ago, I was developing an app for charging electric vehicles in a domestic environment. And I was targeted to implement the firmware update process of the wallbox, which is that device where you plug your car to charge it. And you typically have it inside your garage or your parking lot, and there might not be an internet connection down there. Of course, I did not develop on the garage or on the streets, but I had it in my living room. And the implementation I was doing was specifically for the offline mode, since the wallbox doesn't have an internet connection. So in that case, the app should do all the heavy lifting and all the works by downloading the firmware files for the specific version of the wallbox, and then transfer to it using different technologies like TCP sockets and SFTP connection. And finally, when the files are transferred, and the wallbox is beginning to update itself, it disconnects from the app, and then the user is presented by this screen, which says that the firmware update could last as long as 40 minutes. 40 minutes is a lot of time, and I was presenting my implementations in a sprint review call, so I let all the others do the talking, and then eventually, 8 hours later, it was my turn again, and the wallbox completed its update process, and I found myself in this situation. The wallbox was trying to communicate with me with this big giant LED in front of it, of which color, of course, meant a different result for the firmware update. It's like green, the firmware update is successful, or maybe yellow, it's still ongoing, or red for errors, but I got stuck here, and I couldn't figure out which color it was, since I am colorblind, and I couldn't tell if it was really green or yellow. And the fun part is that I was streaming from my iPhone, so I opened the camera and pointed it to the wallbox to let all the others in the call see what I was seeing and trying to help me, and no one was able to help me, actually. Maybe because the camera was actually faking the colors by making them more vibrant. I don't know, actually, I'm no expert in colors. But maybe because there's a certain part of the population, 5% of people actually suffer from color blindness, on which red and green is the most common one. And my friend actually suggested me to put this image on this slide, saying that there were numbers inside the circles, and I trusted them, and I hoped I did the right thing, and there are no compromising symbols inside. Anyway, the problem here is I should say that there's also people that cannot perceive any color at all. So you see the problem here. The Wallbox was trying to communicate with me only by using a single way of communication, which is color, and which might not be the most accessible choice. So what is accessibility and why it is so important? Everyone has a different way of accessing the world, and accessibility is a way to let all people enjoy our products and the features on which we spend so much time working on, regardless of their capabilities or situation. About 1 every 7 people has some kind of disability which affects the way they interact with the world. And the current world population is about 8 billion people, so we're talking of more than 1 billion people. And I want to say this in Italian because it might have a different meaning for us Italians in the room, ma 1 miliardo di persone could not be experiencing the feature that we developed and the app we are published. If it's inaccessible, of course, and that number is going to increase for aging population and, of course, also health conditions. We need to invest on accessibility, of course, for ethical and moral reasons, but we might also have temporary disability. For example, one friend of mine got a very bad cold, and she wasn't able to hear anything for about 2 weeks. So she had to find a different way of interaction with the world, for example, by viewing movies with subtitles enabled. And last but not least, European laws are coming, and I want to go a bit more in depth on this point. The European Union published in 2019 with the European Accessibility Act a set of guidelines and recommendations which are required and active for public sector governments app and website since June 2021, so it's 3 years ago. And we are next, because next year is going to be the private sector compliance, so our time is really running out. There are several degrees of conformance, level A being the basic one, and it already has a massive impact on a lot of people, but the level that we should be targeting for is the level 2A, which is the required level of accessibility, and it means that our app will be accessible to most people and in most situations. There's also another level of compliance, which is the highest one, and it's really not recommended to work with it because it's very hard to achieve. And I mean, there is a reason if they call it level A. These are the guidelines that we should follow. So we need our apps to be to function with texture size up to 2000% without loss of functionality or contents. We should be able to let the user touch our buttons of at least 44 pixels. We should provide a content description for all the elements that we present on screen. We should be careful about color contrast ratio. It has to be at least of 4.5 to 1 for regular text. And our apps should support orientation change, so we should not restrict it to just one single orientation like landscape or portrait, unless it's really essential. And some users might plug external devices to interact with our app, and we should let them do the full keyboard navigation. Statistics reveal that around 19% of users access the internet using a mobile phone of some kind. There is a really big number of apps that are completely inaccessible, and that is what is making us Bula not happy. But the majority of apps are in the middle of the graph, so they are a little bit accessible, but we really need to change this trend and go to the farthest side of the right side of this chart. Because anyone will benefit actually from an accessible design which offers multiple ways to interact with the app, and that is clearly understandable even in difficult environments, just like low lighting or high noise. Let me give an overview of the design phase dedicated to those of you who have, like me, personal projects, or maybe for those who participate in the design phases of company projects. The worldwide reach of App Store means that our app can be enjoyed from people all around the globe, so we need to explore a way to make it useful and appealing to as many people as possible. And inclusion design is an iterative process, and it should be reiterated at the beginning of each phase of the project, so we should really plan ahead for accessibility and internationalization. Now, I hope you find me boring and that I don't surprise you if I say that our apps should at least support an English language to reach the biggest part of the market. But I can guarantee that I'm working right now on an app used by all Italians. It's a very big Italian company, and it has the Italian strings hard-coded inside view controllers. And how inclusive is that? It's like if I gave this talk only using Italian. Quanti mi capirebbero se parlassi così? That's good. So actually a small part of people, since we are in Italy, so that's funny. And, but what if I say like this, Io du scioglie nen mi bai wu zia shushan ma? I tried to speak Chinese and I probably misspelled some words, and I know there is Chinese people in the audience, but this really isn't a way to be accessible if I gave my talk either both Chinese or in Italian. We should be careful about using slang or informal words in our app, because we should be sure that we are not offending anyone and that we are giving enough context to help people understand better. And also be careful about using gestures, since the same thing could have different meanings around the world. When talking about iconography, we should ask ourselves how much specific or universal we want to be. And also be careful about association, as for example, the anawa in an English-speaking context means wisdom, while in Arabic-speaking context means bad luck or even death. We should ensure that the design doesn't exclude people with disabilities or who interact in different ways, and we should make complex tasks simple and straightforward to perform, and also make sure that all the content we are showing can be perceived whether people are using hearing, sight, or touch. About text size, we should consider it early on in the design phase, so to achieve a good clarity on all display sizes. And this might be just a personal preference for some user, but think about your grandmother. It might be the difference between being able to use the app or not. And also, of course, be careful about ground visual loss. When possible, like in the example I did at the beginning of the talk, we should not rely on color alone, and maybe use symbols in addition to colors to help even people that cannot perceive any colors. And people may enable some iOS accessibility features, as button shapes or differentiate without color. We should provide alternative appearance for them. As I said, we should use high contrast color, so at least 4.5 to 1. And Accessibility Inspector integrated in Xcode actually has a color contrast calculator, which was my fellow friend even in this slide and this presentation. And we should, in general, avoid using both red and green, as it's the most common color blindness. And think about a graph, for example, with 2 lines. If these lines were one green and one red, it would not communicate anything to me, at least. So in that case, it would be nice if symbols were added to the lines. And of course, avoid using colors that vibrate next to each other. There's another iOS accessibility feature, which is increased contrast mode, and it already adapts system colors if we are using them inside our apps. Otherwise, we can provide a different asset, even for dark mode. About 1 every 3 people has some form of motion sensitivity, and that might be like going on a roller coaster or maybe reading a book in the car, but it can also be more subtle by looking at the screen with motion on it. So when these users enable reduced motion, we should disable autoplay of videos, reduce animations, and disable some effects. This is a great example. In the Maps app, we have several ways of interaction, because for vision users, we have the giant map in top of it, but the list at the bottom makes it useful even for blind users, which can use VoiceOver to navigate it and enjoy it too. And actually, it's a design choice that it's a benefit for all users, actually. So it means that it will reach, our app will reach actually more users. There are also people with motor impairments, and we should be able to let them enjoy our apps by using external devices such as the Braille keyboard or our accessible switches. The last thing that I want to focus on is the new implementation in iOS 17, which is assistive access, which helps people that have cognitive disabilities to use our apps easily by reducing the number of distractions. Now, I would like to give you an overview of how we can implement and support this feature in our projects. SwiftUI, of course, was born integrating accessibility since day one, and I know there are still a lot of UIKit developers, and actually, how many are in this room, including myself? Okay. A small number. I know it's hard to transition and in SwiftUI in our big projects created several years ago, but we should really begin to do it because with SwiftUI, I rediscovered the joy of being an app developer by forgetting all the auto layout stuff and constraints. And since SwiftUI makes it easier also on accessibility. VoiceOver is the screen reader integrated in iOS, and it basically reads all the elements that are visible on the device screen. Imagine an inaccessible app used by a blind user on which VoiceOver will read every element that is present on the screen. And I think it will give 30 seconds to an accessible app like that before deleting it. And it's like when, for example, I download an app from App Store full of hype and then discover that it has a poor design or poor UX. I typically just trash it. Most views already have a default accessibility label, which is the description of the content of the element to be read by assistive technologies like VoiceOver. What should we check on this automatic assignment of labels? Does it provide enough information when it's read by VoiceOver? Is it spoken correctly? For example, if it has numbers or punctuation. And is the context clear? For example, we have a like button on this portion of Spotify app, and that like button clearly is referring to the song we are listening to, so it's enough context. But if we had a different layout, maybe with a list with several different elements, in that case, if there were multiple like buttons, we should not just label them like, because that would be a lack of context. We should label them like song button or like playlist button. So we can, of course, support custom accessibility labels, and they work towards internationalization as well. System elements already provide basic ones, like all the default SwiftUI views. But if we implement or create custom controls, maybe even complex one, but their behavior is really similar to the default controls that are provided by iOS, we can use accessibility representation to get all the accessibility works for free. Accessibility elements also have value, which is the readable description of the current value of a view. We have traits describing what the element is for accessibility, and we can add them to our custom controls or maybe even custom views. For example, a button knows that he's a button, but an image with a non-tap gesture attached to it, a blind user might not know that it's clickable, it's pressable, so we need to add that trait to the image. And in general, we should prefer creating reusable components as it simplifies really a lot accessibility integration. And we experienced on several projects actually in NTT Data, when some clients asked us to implement accessibility 2 years ago, and we did not struggle that much as we already had different components, so we implemented accessibility inside them and then they diffused in all the app. VoiceOver, by default, we read the file name of the images. That might not be the best choice. We should then mark them as decorative if it's not needed. We can also hide the view completely with accessibility hidden true. A cool feature of iOS photo apps is that lets us add a description to photos, so when even blind user can enjoy them. For example, when we are sharing them via AirDrop. I think that's a nice feature. We should provide text alternatives for any non-text contexts, and for example, that graph in this image. And we should, of course, provide subtitles and live transcriptions for all multimedia content like audio and videos inside our app. When using buttons without custom labels, VoiceOver might read the image name. That might not be the best choice. And also, we should be careful to not add the element type in the accessibility label, as it will be read twice. And in general, avoid redundant text like play song in a song app, or when the context is enough clear, just label a button delete, it's enough. Views typically are pronounced by VoiceOver on the order of appearance, but we can change it with sort priority. And we can also help blind user navigate quickly in maybe tall pages where, for example, a blind user might be wanting to go to the bottom of the page. If we add headers at the sections of the app, they, with the rotor, can quickly scroll through it without having VoiceOver to read all the elements that are inside that page. We should be combining the same views to reduce number of elements and group them together, and we, of course, can do it. We should inform VoiceOver user that something happened. For example, if a blind user is opened a page where it is a camera that is loading, he will never know that the camera is loaded unless we help them by using accessibility notification announcement. That's another cool feature we have for accessibility in Swift. About text resize, system fonts and SF symbols are automatically handled. And icons and custom fonts should scale too, and we can do it actually with several different approaches. And we should also support bold text to create emphasis that for people that struggle to focus. We should change layout at the largest accessibility sizes, since an horizontal layout may not be the best choice when the text gets really big, and we can do it easily with SwiftUI. Content should, as I said earlier, not restrict its view to just one orientation. Another thing handled easily in SwiftUI, and a lesser session, of course. There are a lot of view modifiers and other features that you can find about accessibility, and I'm not going to say anything about each one of them. So you can follow best practices and official guidelines on the Apple Developer Portal, where you can also find views, videos, and documentation and experience of humans that use these technologies, assistive technologies, in their life. And I found them so inspiring, so I really suggest you to check this out. Then I'm going to a quick carousel of the current state of some App Store apps. And I begin by saying that all apps made from Apple and devices too, of course, are accessible. And Meta apps are mostly accessible, like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. And most of nice apps with really cool UIs and really smooth animation are probably not ready for accessibility. For example, when handling text resize. Let's see some of them. Let's try increasing text in WhatsApp. Yep, text resize test is passed. What about the Amazon Assistant? It passes too, nice. What about Spotify? Spotify did a good job at adapting its layout. Let's try with Waze. I use it a lot to navigate in Rome, since traffic is really a mess. And it actually ignored it. So I don't know if I will still be able to use it when I get older. What about Google Maps? How does it handle the texture size? Only the labels on the map adapted. And the last one, it's an Italian government app, which is called IO, but it's pronounced IO. And if you watched Alessandro's talk 2 months ago here at Flutter Heroes, you already know how this is going. And in fact, it failed. The font stayed the same. We should ask ourselves, what about our apps? Are we ready for June 2025? And more importantly, how can we test them? There are many ways to test. I will show you the most basic ones. And as I said, we have accessibility inspectors integrated inside Xcode, and it offers us several ways to query and test accessibility features. For example, using inspection tab, we can manually investigate element properties and simulate voiceover. With the audit tab, we can get a list of potential accessibility issues. And using settings, we are able to quickly change system accessibility settings. And it also has a slider to rapidly change font size, even on a device connected via Wi-Fi. That's nice. My fellow friend, the color contrast calculator, helpful for colorblinds, and I used it for these slides, as I said, and it's integrated in Accessibility Inspector. It lets you check if the background and the foreground colors are compatible and have enough contrast. There is also automatic testing and libraries and simulator debug tools that we can use to test accessibility and maintain it over the development of the apps, but they cannot replace real-world tests, as humans using real assistive technologies are our best source of truth and of feedbacks. And we should also be testing on vintage device and not only the most performant iPhone. So wrapping up, I would like to point the focus only on the last two of this list, which is communicate important information using different ways, as I showed in the first example that I did on my talk, and have diversity in your team, because that's the best way to test if the accessibility that we are implementing on the app, it really is well made and it works for them. Let me thank you for all of your attention. This was my first time speaking in public and first time speaking in English, and I'm so honored to be here. And so, grazie mille a tutti.